Okay, so here we go. Parsha in a nutshell. Behalotcha. The name of the parsha, Behalotcha, means when you raise, and is found in Numbers chapter 8. Okay. Aaron is commanded to raise light in the lamps of the menorah, and the tribe of Levi is initiated into the service of the sanctuary. This seems like a conclusion of the previous book and the previous two portions. We were discussing the order of the temple and the service in the temple, but the opening statement of the parsha is about lighting the menorah, which is very strange because it's actually the third time the menorah is mentioned. So what is the menorah doing here? So there's symbolism here, but we'll leave that for right now. Now we start with the stories. A second Passover is instituted in response to the petition, "Why should we be deprived?" by a group of Jews who were unable to bring the Passover offering in its appointed time because they were ritually impure. So what's happening here is it's the first anniversary of the Exodus. And obviously, first Passover Seder. Well, the first one was still in Egypt, actually. The Jews were in Egypt the night before they left. They were supposed to, the night before they left, God says, well, God tells them 2 weeks early to celebrate the night before they leave. And they had to be indoors and they had to bring the offering and they had to put the blood on the doorpost, etc. So this is like a celebration in anticipation of the victory, of the freedom. So, but it's 12 hours before they were freed. But now is the first anniversary. So obviously, if it's the first Passover, even today everyone's running to a Seder. I think like 70% of American Jews go to some sort of Seder. Everyone's running to this. Could you imagine the first year everybody wants to be at the Seder? But then there's a problem. There's a technicality. In the days when the Seder included a Pesach offering, a sacrifice in the temple, so you have to be ritually pure. But there were people who were ritually impure because they touched a dead person. Who did they touch? It's another story. They had Joseph's bones. They had there's all kinds of opinions. In any case, they say, why should we miss out? Why should we be deprived? So God responds. God instructs Moses on the procedures for Israel's journey. No, so the response is the second Passover, 1 month after the first Passover. If you were not able to bring the Passover on its appointed time, which is the 14th day of Nisan, 14th day of month one, you bring the Passover offering 14th day of month two. So that's a beautiful thing for many, many reasons. It's one of the only two mitzvot that was initiated, maybe even the only one, depending how you read it, that was initiated by the people. 613 commandments, God tells Moshe, this is what you should do. Here, the people say, why should we miss out? We want an opportunity. That is a very, it's a unique mitzvah, a lot of symbolism. Maybe we'll get there. Okay, now we start the traveling. God instructs Moses on the procedures for Israel's journeys and encampments in the desert. And the people journey in formation from Mount Sinai, where they had been camped for nearly a year. So they're at Mount Sinai for nearly a year. They're about to go. How long does it take to get from where they were to the border of the land of Israel? Maybe 10 days if you're walking. Maybe less. Moses says 11 days in Deuteronomy. Okay, 11 days. So in their mind, we're almost coming to Israel like immediately. But we know the end of the story. The end of the story is that there's delay after delay, debacle after debacle until next week when we read the story of the spies, and then it's delayed for 40 years. But at this point, everybody's optimistic. Everything's looking good. We're leaving Sinai, we're going to Israel, and we'll live happily ever after. But what happens once you start journeying? All of a sudden, all the trouble starts. You get into the car, the kids say, are we there yet? It's too hot, it's too cold, we're hungry, we're thirsty. And when everybody is in one place, okay, fine. So things are in some sort of pattern and order. But once you start journeying, then the things that have been maybe festering underwater now all of a sudden come to the surface. And now you start with the complaints, and there's all different types of complaints that come up. Um, there's so much drama. Here they put it into one paragraph, which does not do justice, so we're going to have to read it inside the Torah itself. But here we go. The people are dissatisfied with their bread from heaven, the manna, and demand that Moses supply them with meat. Okay, this is the understatement of the century. Moses appoints 70 elders to whom he imparts his spirit to assist him in the burden of governing the people. Okay, this doesn't really do justice to the story. It doesn't even attempt to. In any case, that's the story. People complain. We want meat. Moses is very upset. He wants to resign. He comes to God. He says, kill me. I want nothing to do with these people. God says, take it easy, relax. We'll appoint 70 people to help you. And that's, in fact, what happened. The final episode of the story is Miriam speaks negatively of Moses and is punished with leprosy. Moses prays for her healing, and the entire community waits 7 days for her recovery. Um, that's the end of the portion. So we have some drama. Like I said, a lot of it is negative, even though the negativity does not the complaints. It's not only one complaint; it's multiple complaints. And Moses is so upset and so offended that that's not conveyed here in this little nutshell, but we'll see it in the Torah. And we have to figure out what's happening, why is it happening, what is and most importantly, what is the lesson for us? So that is the roadmap for today. So we'll start with this. We'll start with the menorah. Okay, so why don't we look inside? Why don't we open up the Torah? So if you open up the blue Chumash, the blue stone edition, we have the Torah. We have this week's parsha on page 774 in the Hebrew, 775 in the English. Let's see if we could Genesis Numbers 8. Okay, so I'm going to share it on the screen. I'm going to read a little bit. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, Hashem spoke to Moses saying, the translation is a little bit different because I'm reading from the screen, but same idea. Speak to Aaron and say to him, when you light the lamps, the 7 lamps shall cast their light toward the face of the menorah. Aaron did so. He lit the lamps toward the face of the menorah as the Lord had commanded Moses. And then we talk about what the menorah is. Verse 4, this was the form of the menorah, hammered work of gold. From its base to its flower, it was hammered work, according to the form that the Lord has shown Moses, so that he construct the menorah. What does hammered mean? Hammered means, very interesting. There's 2 ways to make a menorah. The menorah, usually what you do is you take the 6 branches and the stem, and then you either screw it on or weld it on. Hammered means you take one piece of gold and you melt it, and then you form it out of one piece of gold, which is obviously much more difficult. But it has the idea it's all one piece. And that's a certain symbolism, because we'll talk about the menorah symbolism, but that's important. Now, verse 1 to verse 4, we know already. It was happened multiple times. It was said multiple times. It belongs in the 3rd book of the Torah, not the 4th book of the Torah. The 3rd book of the Torah discusses the service of the temple. The 4th book of the Torah is how we're leaving Sinai. We're transporting the temple that was already erected and already inaugurated, and we're traveling through the desert. Why reiterate the menorah? So that's an interesting question. So the first thing I want to say is this. I want to say that the menorah is, if you're looking for a symbol of the Jewish people, what is the symbol of the Jewish people? So it's interesting because you have the Star of David, but the Star of David is not biblical. In fact, if you Google it, it's not even clear where the Star of David begins. So people say it comes from David. Maybe yes, maybe no. There's symbolism, sort of 2 triangles facing up, facing down, a lot of Kabbalistic symbolism in the Star of David. But the Star of David is not biblical. And if you look at the menorah probably is the most original symbol in Judaism. Now, I want to say something about symbols, because this is very important. In general, Judaism is against symbols. Right? We don't believe in any symbols. Like we say that you're not allowed to make any symbols of God. Making a symbol is sort of idol worship. In fact, the Torah reiterates again and again that at Sinai, when we had the great revelation, Moshe says, Lo ritem kol tmuna, you never saw any symbols. So symbols of God are dangerous, are heresy, almost idol worship. Why are symbols of God idol worship? Because any symbol is a definition. So if I say this symbolizes God, that means this somehow reflects God. That means I'm describing what God is, but the description is definition. But God has no definition. So if God has no definition, then he has no description. If he has no description, then there's no symbol. He's everything. He's infinite. Infinite means, in Hebrew, infinite is in English, it's one word, but in Hebrew, it's ein sof, no limit. Now, how do you describe anything? Description is always definition. I want to describe this table. Tell me anything you want about the table. It's everything you tell me is going to be a limitation. You're going to say it's 6 feet. Okay, it's not 7 feet. You're going to say it's 2.5 feet tall. Okay, that's a limitation. You're going to say the color. Okay, so what color is gray? It's gray. It's not pink. Right? What's the material? Plastic. It's plastic. It's not wood. right? So whatever you're going to say is a definition. So God has no definition. The only thing we could say about God is that he has no definition, right? So there's no symbol. So symbol is terrible. So, but on the other hand, we do have some symbols. We have the menorah. We have certain parts of the temple had to was like symbol, like the altar, maybe a symbol. So here's a very interesting point that the symbols in Judaism are not symbols for God or depicting God. What the symbol is, it's a symbol of what we should become. It's a total different story, right? If you say we have a symbol menorah, what does it mean? It means we are the menorah, not God is the menorah. We are the menorah. And now you think, why are we a menorah? So what's the purpose of the Jewish people? To bring light to the world. So the Jewish people are the menorah. Now, that's why it was important to emphasize, the Torah always emphasizes that the menorah is hammered. There may be 7 branches. There may be 7 different types of ways of serving God, 7 different types of Jews, generally speaking. If you want to be particular, each one of those 7 branches become many, many more. But the concept in Kabbalah was 7 sfirot. So generally speaking, there's 7 types of Jews. So you see different people are different. I'm sorry. So you could track it down to the seven sfirot, the 7 basic emotional traits that people have. So I don't want to do a whole, we could do a class on the 7 sfirot, but it's not. But the point is there's 7 primary emotions. And then some people, now everybody has all 7, but there are people who one of those 7 is more dominant, right? You go to the store to buy paint. So you're talking about you go to the store to buy paint. We just were in the paint store. There's, I don't know, tens of thousands of shades of colors, at least thousands, maybe tens of thousands of shades of colors. But there's basically a few primary colors, and those primary colors make all the shades. So what's the difference between the colors? Which one is more dominant? So there are 7 types of Jews, generally speaking. But the point is, on the other hand, they're all miksha, they're all hammer, they're all the same material. At the core, we're all one. So maybe we look different. One person is more motivated by love, one person is more motivated by discipline, one person is into study, one person is into charity, one person, everybody has something else. You ask a Jew, what's your favorite mitzvah? Everybody has a different mitzvah. What's your favorite holiday? What's your favorite ritual? Everybody has a different way of serving God. And that's okay because we are different. But the point here is we're all the menorah, we're all bringing light. The way we bring light is different, but yet we're all united. And that's the symbolism of the menorah. Now, why are we talking about the menorah now? Like I said before, it's mentioned already in the 2nd book, it's mentioned in the 3rd book of the Torah. Now we're in the 4th book of the Torah. And every word that's written here, well, almost every word, but the idea of lighting the menorah and what the menorah is made of was already stated. So why is it stated again? So one interpretation, the Rebbe actually gave this interpretation, is that now we're starting to travel. We left Egypt, we were at Sinai, we become a nation at Sinai, and now we're traveling. So now we're traveling. Okay, we're traveling to Israel. So what you want to say is, what is the purpose of the journey? What is the purpose of our journey, of our mission? In other words, now is the time to reiterate the mission statement. Mission statement, menorah. Because the menorah is a symbol. What is a symbol? Again, not a symbol for what God is, because God doesn't have a symbol, but it's a symbol for what we have to do. Wherever we go to bring light to the world, to ourselves, to the world, to everywhere, wherever we go. And if you're living here and someone else is living there, and everybody's in a different corner of the world, it's because, in a way, you're the menorah in that place. So that is really the symbol and the mission statement of the Jewish people from the first journey at Sinai until the end of history. And that's why when we start moving, the Torah stops and takes the time and talks about, gives you no less than 4 verses that we already know, and reiterates, ladies and gentlemen, there is a menorah, there's an Aaron who lights the menorah. We could talk about every detail about how the menorah, about the symbolism of the menorah, but we don't want to get into that right now because there's so many other stories in the Torah. But I think it's important to say there's a shift here. We're starting to travel. If we're starting to travel, you have to say, what is our purpose? So yes, the words light unto a nation that we know the Jewish people are supposed to be a light unto a nation, that comes from the prophet Isaiah. That's in the Nevi'im and the prophets. It's not written explicitly in the Torah. But in the Torah, it gives it to you in the form of a symbol, menorah. And like I said, it's not just a technicality of telling us what the service of the temple was, because that was already written earlier. That was already written in the 2nd book and reiterated in the 3rd book. So what does it say here? Oh, we're traveling. What is our purpose? Menorah. Okay, that's enough said about the menorah, even though we could talk about this all day. Okay, now,
People always do a good start, like
Yeah.
David, and I happen to have one that's
Yeah.
and it says poem in it.
I'm nothing against the Star of David. It has a lot of symbolism, a lot of Kabbalistic symbolism. And I think in different places that actually was even more um, um, a symbol of Judaism, right? I think in the Soviet Union, for example, I think someone told me that what? Yeah, the Star of David. So I think the Rebbe's father's grave has a Star of David, which is strange because where I grew up there was no
Yeah.
they don't put it on graves, but I think that in Soviet Union it was like
You don't wear jewelry.
That was before the Soviet Union. At Soviet Union,
no, he passed away in 44, in 1944. Oh,
well,
you're saying in Soviet Union there was no symbols in general, right? I get it, but I'm just saying,
Jewish symbols, no Jewish.
yeah, there were no Jewish symbols in general. But I'm saying like in the well, this was in Uzbekistan. It was more distant than Russia, but so maybe there was a little bit more freedom. But the bottom line is, yeah, the point is that it's a symbol and it goes back a very long time and it's very meaningful and either it was holy, either it was always holy or it became holy. One of the two. But again, I'm not here to, God forbid. But I'm just saying the menorah is a biblical symbol. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. So and we do it all the time. So there's all kinds of subtleties here. Why yeah, I don't want to go into the menorah too much. In other words, menorah is the only ritual of the temple, the only mitzvah in the temple that we actually do today. We don't bring the animal sacrifices. We don't bring the incense, the ketoret, which was spices that were brought every day. But the menorah, we do what we do. When do we do it? On Hanukkah. So it's something that we don't do it the exact same way. The menorah in the temple had 7 branches. We have 8 branches. It was a little bit different. We don't. The menorah was lit every day. We do it only once a year. But menorah was associated with the number 7. 7 branches. We're number 8. 8 days of Hanukkah. 8 branches. There's all kinds of differences. But the bottom line is the only thing that we do today from the temple is the menorah. So that just reiterates the point that we are the menorah. That's our story. That's our mission. Wherever we go, even in the exile, even in diaspora, we're lighting the menorah. So that's
The best, I mean,
yes, but not besamim, but not the besamim of the temple. In other words, the besamim there was a whole recipe. No, but I'm just saying there's a recipe in the besamim in the temple, the ketoret. It was called ketoret incense, about exactly which species to use. And this was a phenomenal aroma, not like besamim today is just one dimensional. Here you had like how many? There was 11 ingredients. Okay, so and they would put it on fire, and the whole room would fill up with smoke. There's this whole ceremony, and they did it twice a day, just like they did the menorah twice a day. It depends who you ask. Maybe once a day, maybe twice a day. But the ketoret, the incense was certainly twice a day. So the point is, it was so central, and we don't do that. But the menorah, we do. And there's this whole medrash. The medrash says that why we mentioned the menorah here, because the previous parsha talks about that the leaders of each tribe brought gifts at the inauguration. Aaron was upset because he wasn't involved, neither he nor his tribe. And God says, don't worry, your light in the menorah is greater than all the sacrifices that are being brought. That's the medrash. And there's so much to talk about this, but why is the menorah greater? And Ramban, famously Ramban, Nachmanides, he's the one who makes this point that the menorah is greater. Why? Because the other offerings stop when the temple is destroyed. The menorah never stops because we light the menorah even today. So in some ways, the menorah is, and again, this ties into the point that menorah is the mission statement. The menorah symbolizes what we're supposed to do in this world. Okay, that's too much philosophy and symbolism. Now we got to get to drama, human stories where everybody's complaining. I'm going to skip the second Passover for a minute, just because, again, there's a lot to say. But if we talk about it, we're not going to get to where we need to go. I'm keep turning to. I'm right now on page 783, and we're talking about again how to travel. They would make 2 trumpets, and it was time to travel. They would blow the trumpets. Everybody travels, and finally they're about to move. They're trying to move. It's like when I have to leave the house. You're trying to leave, and then there's always something new. There's always something new. So there's more and more verses that Torah reiterates how they traveled. Moshe tells his father-in-law, "Please stay with us." He doesn't want to. He wants to go home. Finally, on page 787, we're getting to the point where they're about to start traveling. Yeah. So Ben is saying that in some temples, they had Reformed temples that had 7 branches. So 7 branches is good to have a symbol for what we did in the temple, but we're not going to light 7. In fact, you're not supposed to light 7 because you're not supposed to replicate the temple precisely. You're supposed to change. And then there's all kinds of mysticism. The mysticism, it was not a Hanukkah class, but it's menorah, so it's hard for me to resist. 7 is the complete number of nature. 6 days of the weekend, Shabbat is the holiness within nature. 8 is above nature. So circumcision is above nature. So what happens is like this: in the times of the temple, you can get away with natural light. In other words, regular light. In the darkness of exile, you need additional light. So you need number 8. You need miraculous light. So in some ways, because the story of Hanukkah is a story of story of oppression, right? There was an invasion, and the temple was violated, and the Jewish people were in a very dark time. They need to you have to dig deeper. When everything is fine, number 7 is enough. When things are challenging, you have to dig deeper and go to the core and go to the essence, and that's number 8. And that's why Hanukkah is 8 candles. And the exile, the menorah of the exile is 8 candles. Exile means outside the temple. In the temple, you don't need such intense holiness. You need holiness. Everything is fine.
There are 6.
There's 6 in the middle. So we could talk about 2. There's all kinds of symbolism. What is the middle and the 6? There's all kinds of symbolism. One symbolism is what's the middle stem? Some people say it's Shabbat. And that's another whole story. How to think about Shabbat. Is it the end of the week or is it the middle of the week? Because on one model, Shabbat is the middle of the week. The first Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, you're preparing for Shabbat. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday is influence from the previous Shabbat. What is the center of your reality? Right? So there's 2 ways that we like to think of it as the weekend. In some ways, it is the weekend because the first Shabbat is the weekend. After Shabbat follows the 7 days. But there's another model where it's the middle because it's the point, it's the essence. But we don't want to go into that. There's other symbolisms. There's 6 orders of the Mishnah. The Mishnah is the oral interpretation of the Torah, and then there's the written Torah, which is the stem. And the six orders of the Mishnah interpret the 7, and are basically branching out and interpreting the 7. So there's all kinds of symbolism here.
Is the Chumash the written Torah?
So the Chumash is the written Torah. The Mishnah is the oral Torah. Yeah. Yehuda authored the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda authored the Mishnah, the oral Torah, because the oral Torah. No. Chumash is Moshe. Chumash is Moshe. Now the Mishnah is written down, but that's because it wasn't supposed to be written down. It was a fear that it's going to be forgotten.
That's both.
Yeah, that certainly is a tangent, but to be brief. So we have, so let me do 45 seconds on this. Initially, there was supposed to be a stark division between the written Torah and the oral Torah, which is the written Torah is the 5 books of Moses, and then later the prophets, and all the commentary are not supposed to be written down. They're supposed to be passed on by heart, and that's how it was for 1,300 years. So there was commentary, of course, because the written Torah by itself is a closed book. You can't really understand what it's saying. Torah says put on tefillin. It doesn't say what tefillin are. The Torah says, my favorite example is to tell people don't believe me, but I say this, but it's true. But nowhere in the Torah does it say you have to fast on Yom Kippur. Every Jew knows you have to fast on Yom Kippur, except the Torah doesn't say it. What does the Torah say? Torah says in the 10th day of the 7th month, Yom Kippur, you should inflict pain on your soul. Okay. So for me, running 5 miles inflicts pain. So I won't have to fast, and I'm going to be able I'm just going to jog, and that will be my pain. So no, the oral Torah, the commentary that was passed on from Moses says that it means you shouldn't eat and shouldn't drink. But all that was passed on by heart. It wasn't written down. And that's how it was for 1,300 years. And then at a certain point, because of the Great Depression, people couldn't study and people couldn't preserve, because remember, everything had to be committed to memory. So everything they learned, they had to review 100 times. That was the standard. So then there was a threat that it's going to be forgotten, and that's why Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Rabbi Yehuda the Prince, in the year 190 approximately, he spent a few decades on this, but he finishes the monumental task of committing the oral Torah into writing, at least in very concise form. And then 300 years after that, they wrote commentary on the Mishnah, and that becomes the Talmud or the Gemara, which is explaining the Mishnah. Okay, but that's already tangent. What is it called? Even today, we call Torah Shabbat Peh, we call it oral Torah, which is a joke because it's written down. But the point is, but it's still different. Why is it different? Because the written Torah, because it's dictated by God, every word is holy, even if you don't understand what it's saying. That's the distinction. When it comes to the oral Torah, if you read the Mishnah, you don't understand, it's not holy. If you read Psalms and you don't understand, it's holy. If you read the Torah and you don't understand, it's holy. Why? Because the words itself were chosen by God, and the prophets give us the word of God. The oral Torah, it's not about the word, it's about the idea, the interpretation, the explanation. So there, the mitzvah is to understand. So it's a different type of, it's sort of a different type of experience. And that's why you can get called up to the Torah, or you could study the Torah, you read the Torah, it's a mitzvah. I don't fully understand. Doesn't matter. The words are holy. Why? These are the words that God shows. These are the words of God. It also has ideas, of course, you have to understand. But even if you don't understand, it's a mitzvah. If you read the Talmud and you don't understand, it's not a mitzvah. Because the oral Torah, it's the idea, it's not the word, it's not the writing down of the word, it's not the letters are holy. Okay, but that's already we're going totally off. We're not going to have time for the drama. No problem. I'm turning to page 786, and on the screen, I'm looking I'm going to show the screen also on page 786, 787. So this is chapter 10 and 11. The first thing I want to show you, I can't show it to you on the screen because it doesn't exist on the screen, I don't think. Sixth reading. If you look at the Hebrew, what do you see, Daniela, right before, if you look at the Hebrew column, 4 lines from the bottom?
Oh, I see an
Upside down nun. There's an upside down nun in the beginning of the paragraph and upside down nun at the end of the paragraph.
Yeah.
So it's totally strange. It's totally strange, totally unusual.
Yeah.
And well, the gap is the paragraph break, so that's okay. The Torah doesn't give you even sentence breaks or sentence breaks or any other punctuation, but you do get a new paragraph. Okay, so here we have new paragraphs. But what I'm trying to say is, so all the way at the end of this paragraph, right before, so verse 35 of the previous verse, so this is verse 35. I'm just going to read it. It's actually a very interesting verse because we say this in our prayers. When we open up the ark on Shabbat to take out the Torah, we say this verse. What verse do we say? So it was, whenever the ark set out, Moses would say, "Arise, O Lord, may your enemies be scattered, and may those who hate you flee from you." In other words, we're talking the Jews are starting to travel. So the ark is traveling because the temple has been deconstructed and now transported, and now the Levites are holding the ark. So Moshe would say, the ark is traveling, and he would say this verse. Whenever the ark would travel, he would say, "Arise, arise, O Lord, may your enemies be scattered, and may those who hate you flee from you." And when it came to rest, he would say, "Repose, O Lord, among the myriads of the thousands of Israel." So we're coming to rest. So he says God should rest amongst the tens of thousands of Jews. Now, I just want to say, so it's fascinating because we say this verse, right? In our prayer book, we think about this in our prayers. Most of the prayer book is about 2,400 years old or newer. Only the parts that are in the Torah are 3,300 years old, like the Shema. The Shema is very ancient. The Shema is the most ancient part of the prayer book, but also this verse. This is a quote from Moshe would say. Moshe would say this. So this is sort of a new thing. Now we're starting. They travel. If you go back, verse 33, they travel the distance of 3 days from the mountain of the Lord, and the ark of the Lord's covenant traveled 3 days ahead of them to seek for them a place to settle. They're traveling. They started traveling. Now we get to chapter 11. It's almost funny because in contemporary parlance, chapter 11 is you file for chapter 11, you're going for bankruptcy. So here it's almost like a spiritual bankruptcy, and you're going to see again and again and again the stories and the complaints, and it's actually unbelievable to watch this debacle. It's actually unbelievable. Oh, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. So it's framing. It's saying it's framing here, but it's like saying, ladies, this is its own thing. These 2 verses, this is something new. So we'll talk about the 2 nuns, but I just want to say this is a transition. After this point, everything blows up in the negative sense. The people were looking to complain. The people took to seeking complaints in the English. The people took to seeking complaints. So, and it was evil in the ears of the Lord. The Lord heard and his anger flared, and a fire from the Lord burnt among them, consuming the extremes of the camp. Basically, it means some people died. The people cried out to Moses. Moses prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. This is complaint number 1. Now, it's very interesting. I'm going to read one more verse. He named the place Tav Erah, for the fire of the Lord had burned among them there. I'm on page 789. Okay. Doesn't say what the complaint was. Why not? Later on, almost every other complaint, the Torah says what the complaint was. But here it doesn't say what the complaint was. You know why? Doesn't matter. Everybody complained for something else. That's what we're saying. The people are looking to complain. It doesn't really matter what they were complaining about. It's not important. If they wasn't this, there would be something else, right? So when the Torah doesn't tell you what they complained about, that itself is telling. That what they complained doesn't matter. The specific complaint is irrelevant. They were looking to complain. Now we have another story where they complained for something specific. This is verse 4. But the multitude among them began to have strong cravings. Then even the children of Israel once again began to cry, and they said, "Who will feed us meat?" And now this is the most astonishing verse you can ever imagine, verse 5. We remember the fish that we ate in Egypt free of charge, the cucumbers, the watermelons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now our bodies are dried out, for there is nothing at all. We have nothing but manna to look at. Now, I ask you a question. Did the Jews have nothing, eat free sushi in Egypt? Of course not. We remember the fish that we ate in Egypt free of charge. What free of charge? They are slaves. Nothing is free of charge. And here, this is only a year after they left. They're thinking about it, they're looking to complain. Here we get manna from the heaven. Okay, we want meat. We remember the good times when we ate free food in Egypt. And now the Torah goes on to a break and gives a plug, gives an advertisement for the manna, how great the manna was. But in any case, Moshe is I don't know what the best word for this is. I'm not even going to describe it. Moshe is furious. Verse 10. I'm going to verse 10. Moses heard the people weeping with their families, each one at the entrance of a tent. The Lord became very angry, and Moses considered it evil. Moses said to the Lord, "Why have you treated your servant so badly? Why have I not found favor in your eyes that you place the burden of this entire people among me? Did I conceive this entire people? Did I give birth to them? Moshe, am I the mother? What do you want from me? What am I dealing with these people? Go find their mother, right? Did I conceive this entire people? Did I give birth to them? That you say to me, carry them in your bosom as the nurse carries the suckling to the land that you promised their forefathers? What do you want from me? Verse 13, where can I get meat to give all these people? For they are crying on me, saying, give us meat to eat. Alone I cannot carry this entire people, for it is too hard for me. Verse 15, if this is the way you treat me, please kill me if I have found favor in your eyes, so that I not see my misfortune. And God says, and the Lord said to Moses, assemble for me 70 men of the elders of Israel, whom you know to be the people's elders and officers, and you shall take them to the tent of meeting, and they shall stand with you. I will come down to speak with you there, and I will increase the light that is upon you and bestow it upon them. They will bear the burden of the people with you, so that you not bear it alone. And then God is upset. He brings meat for 60 days. We're not going to discuss this whole story right now. The important story is we want to think about Moshe's response. So the first thing I want to say is that there's a few very important points to discuss. First of all, what is Moshe getting so upset? If you think about Moshe's entire career, 40 years of leading the people, the sins that the people have committed were much, much greater. In the past, they served the idol. 40 days after Sinai, God said the first thing, you can't expect a Jew to remember 613 commandments, even 10. Yes, God, you go 10. If you stop me and say, what are the 10 commandments? I don't know. I don't know if I can remember all 10. Maybe yeah, maybe no. But the first two, anyone could remember. Serve the Lord your God. There is one, I'm the Lord your God, meaning believe in God, and you shouldn't have idols. Every Jew knows you don't bow down to idols. It's a simple thing. And here, 40 days after we got the Torah, all the Jews create the golden calf. Moshe, no problem. He defends the people. Goes on the offense, tells God, if you're not going to do this, he mounts a good defense. God forgives the people. And then you can have bigger sins later. People say, I have a friend, he said, Moshe's getting old here, and this is the beginning of the downfall of Moshe. But it's not true. For the next 40 years, Moshe defends the people when they commit greater sins, like next week, when we'll read about it next week, when they don't want to go to Israel, and there's this terrible decree that the Jewish people want to have to stay in the desert for 40 years. And then 40 years later, Moshe's leading them to battle. Moshe has no problem. Moshe is totally fine with leading the people, even though he's committed to them when they have much greater sins. And here, they want some steak, and he sort of loses it, and he says, "I'm dead. I can't do this." So why did he lose his cool? Like what's the big deal? And there's a very beautiful answer, a sad answer. Moses says serving idols is not so bad, because serving idols, you're looking for spirituality. Okay, you're looking in the wrong places. Fine. But what is a serving idol? You want to connect to something greater. You think it's the idol. Okay, so mistakes, so we could teach you. But Moshe is a spiritual guy. And he took the people out of Egypt. And they're at Sinai. And they're studying Torah for a year. And then he says, okay, what do you want? I said, we want meat. Moshe is saying, meat, what do I, basar, where do I have meat from? He's not just saying, where do I have enough butchers to slaughter enough meat to get meat for everybody? That's not what he's saying. He's saying, what do I, I'm not in the business of providing meat for people. I want to provide ideas. I want to teach Torah. I want to teach them how to be spiritual. Basically, Moshe sees his whole teaching career is a failure. My job is to elevate the people, to make them want spirituality. So if they're serving idols, okay, that's not so bad. They're looking in the wrong places, but at least they're seeking spirituality. But I'm trying to talk to them a full year about learning Torah, about elevating, become closer to God. And what do they want? The moment of truth, what do they want? They want meat. Moshe says, I'm not a meat guy. I'm not in the meat business. And God says, you have 70 people to help you. So okay, well, we'll sort of there'll be a sort of a hierarchy. People will help you. We'll have to figure out how that works out. But that's the first point I want to make out. That from Moshe's perspective, this is not just another complaint in a series of complaints. This is dramatic. This means I'm alone. This means I'm teaching and no one's getting the message. This is very sad, and that's why he says I want to die. Now we have to figure out what God teaches Moshe, and in a minute you'll see at the end of the story, Moshe, you see that Moshe gets the point, and Moshe actually is comforted and comforts others. We'll get to that in a second. But before we get to the positive part of the story, you have to see why this is no good. This is a disaster from Moshe's perspective. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Thank you, Rabbi. I was trying to find something positive, and the reason that Moses brings the example of a mother carrying the baby, it kind of hints to that they didn't feel safe to complain to Pharaoh, but they feel safe enough to complain to Moses, right? Because they understood that Moses and God had their.
Yeah, you know the famous joke about that Reagan would say. The famous joke is that that there's an American talking to someone from the Soviet Union during the Soviet Union, and he says, you know, in America it's amazing we have freedom. He says, what's freedom? He says, what's freedom? I could walk into the White House and I could knock on the table of the president in the Oval Office, knock on the table of the president, and say, Mr. President, I don't like how you're running this country. So the guy from the Soviet Union says, really? I could do the same thing. He says, really? He says, yeah. He says, no problem. So I can go onto the train and I could go to Moscow. Okay. I can walk right into the Kremlin. Okay. I could walk right into the premier's office. Okay. And I could bang on his desk. Okay. And I could say, I don't like the way the president of the United States is running his country. So that's the joke. But there's a better joke. There's a better joke. What's the better joke?
I can't complain when
Can't complain. What was that joke?
I just.
Yeah, there's a joke about I can't complain, which is also a good joke. But your point is this. Your point is, yeah, if Moshe is their mother, and I was going to say different. Moshe says, I'm not the mother. And what does God say? He doesn't even have to say it. He says, you are the mother. In other words, the premise of Moshe is saying, I'm not the mother. That's not my responsibility. What is Moshe saying? What does God say? In other words, Moshe, if you ask Moshe, how do you define your leadership role? So Moshe thinks of himself as a teacher. But there is no teacher without being a mother. And that's why he says, am I the mother? And the implication is, yes, you're the mother. It's your responsibility. Now, the mother can't do everything. Sometimes you have to hire a nanny. Sometimes you have to ask for help. So we have 70 elders helping Moshe, but not replacing Moshe, God forbid, right? So you see when Moshe is upset, you see how he says, this is what I signed up for. This is my job. I'm a mother. And the answer is, God doesn't say it, but yes, you have to be devoted to the people like a mother. It's got to be unconditional. Otherwise, there's no leadership, right? Who said this? I'm talking about being a teacher. Moshe, we actually refer to Moshe as Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe our teacher. But there's no teaching without being a mother. We spent Shabbos with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, and he came here and he said this here, so I'm going to repeat it. He says, maybe he took it from somebody else, I don't know, but he said like this. He always says this. He says, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. That's the reality. So you're a teacher, but if you're a teacher and you don't care, nobody cares. The kid comes home from school and the mother says, how come you're not listening in class? It's because my teacher doesn't care about me. So you could say, who cares? The teacher is giving you knowledge. He's giving you a product. You take the product. So they don't care about you. So who cares? What is that? Why is that important? But the kid knows the truth. The kid knows if I don't sense that my teacher cares about me, then I don't care about what they're telling me. And Moshe is working this out with his, I don't want to say anger, but in his, yeah, he's angry. He's angry, no question about it. In his anger, he's working this out, and he's going into, and he's almost redefining what my job is. I thought I'm only a teacher. Now I know I'm a teacher and a mother. Okay, I'm a mother. Does the mother have to do everything? I have to pick up all the toys? No, you hire someone else to pick up the toys. But it's still helping you. You're still the mother. It's still his responsibility. So that's very interesting. Okay, I want to do two more things in the next 9 minutes. One thing I want to talk about is the nuns in the middle. And I want to talk about how actually this story actually, how Moshe learns to see things a little bit differently, transformation within Moses. But let's talk about the two nuns. You don't see it on the screen, but we saw it in the Chumash that right before verse 11, chapter 11, so in chapter 12, right? Danielle is here, so you'll tell me if I'm saying anything that's not true. It's right here in the black book, in the Chumash, and in the Torah. Remember, the Torah has no vowels, no punctuation, but it has two upside down nuns. It's the most strangest things. So verse right before 35 and right after 36, there is two upside down nuns. It's a break. It's a total break. And this in the Talmud, there's discussion what the break represents. But one opinion says, you know why? You thought there were 5 books of Moses. I hate to break the news to you, says Rebbe, the author. There's a disagreement in the Talmud. Some people say it's basically the nuns are upside down to Shay. It doesn't belong here. It belongs a little earlier. It's out of place. Okay, but more interesting interpretation is Rebbe, who authored the Mishnah we mentioned before. Rebbe says, I hate to break the news to you. There's no 5 books of Moses. There are 7 books of Moses. 7 books of Moses. Yeah, because book 3 is really 3 books. You have before verse 35, before Vahi ben Saharon, before, so it was when the ark set out, and then you have these 2 verses are their own book, and then you have everything after, which is its own book. So there's no 5 books of Moses, there are 7 books of Moses. I hate to be the one to break the news to you. That's what he says. Now, what does that mean? Why is it 3 books? Okay, I can stand it, 3 paragraph breaks. So why is it 3 books? So what Rebbe is saying is that something dramatic happened here. What's the big change? So one way to think about this, I don't think I said this in the past, so I always try to say something new, because almost everything I said it in the last, how many years? I think we're doing this for 18 years, maybe more. So I always try to say something new. The life is problematic. The biggest problem of life is that we have the ideal, and then we have the practical. And almost always the practical does not live up to the ideal, because the ideal is perfection. And we live in the real world, the physical world. The physical world is flawed, it's limited, it's finite, it's fleeting. There is no such thing as perfect. So when the ideal is perfection, I'm going to be the perfect father. I'm going to be the perfect spouse. I'm going to be the perfect leader. Whatever I'm going to be perfect in my mind. You stand under the chuppah, you're going to have a perfect life. I'm going to be completely devoted to my spouse. Whatever it is, it's in your vision, it's perfection. And then you have the reality. The reality is there are pressures. You can't always come. You can't always go. You can't always help. Sometimes there's all kinds of real life comes in. I want to be the best parent, but I can't always be the best parent. I can't even be there always, right? I have different pressures. So in my mind, like my kid is, I remember we brought Mishka home from the hospital. There's a certain idealism of what life is going to be like. And the reality is it's never that way. So now that's the reality. So now how do people respond to this dichotomy, this difference between what the ideal vision and the practical vision? Some people keep dreaming and they're disconnected from real life. They're sort of in denial. Right? I'm gonna have a perfect reality, and they're ignoring the reality, the actual reality on the ground. Other people settle for the reality on the ground, for the way life is, for the imperfection. The problem is they stop dreaming. Right? They say the ideal is nonsense. The ideal is for when you're honeymoon. It's not real life. Right? What's the Torah? Now, in this story, we have the first 2 portions. If you read the first 2 portions of the last 2 weeks, go back onto the YouTube, we listen to the last 2 classes. Everything is perfect. There's serenity. The temple is going to be in the middle. You're going to have 4 camps around. There's going to be order. Everyone's going to know their place. Everyone's going to enhance each other. Everyone's going to be anchored by the temple. It's perfection. We have a plan of how this journey is going to work. You plan the perfect vacation. Now, maybe if you go alone, you can do it. If you travel with a few children, the plan is never going to happen, because this person needs the bathroom, this person needs a drink, this person has a headache, and this person lost their shoes. Okay, so in the first two and a half stories up to this point, up to this upside down nuns, the vision is perfect. If you look right before the nuns, Moshe is describing his journey to his father. He says, "Father-in-law, stick around," and he uses the word "good" again and again and again. Where is it? If you look at verse 29 in chapter 10, if you want to start counting the different forms of good, you'll get to a big number. I don't know exactly how I remember. I don't know. Let's count right now. Okay, you ready? 29. Moses said to Hobab the Ruel, the Midianite, his father-in-law Moses, "We are journeying to the place of Hashem that Hashem had said, I shall give it to you. Go with us, and we shall treat you well." Not a good translation. Tov is good. We shall treat you good. Okay? For Hashem has spoken good for Israel. he said, I'm not going to go. He said, please do not forsake us inasmuch as you know our encampments in the wilderness. Okay, verse 32. And it shall be that if you come with us, then the goodness with which Hashem will benefit us, we will do good to you. I'm at 4 already. They journeyed from the mountain of Hashem a 3-day distance, and the ark of the covenant of Hashem journeyed for 3 days. Okay, only 4 times. Maybe there are more. Okay, 4 times. Good, 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 good. In 3 verses. Good, 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 good. It's the good. It's perfect. Moshe is saying the journey is going to go excellent. Because why? That's the ideal vision. What happens as soon as you enter your car and you start driving? As soon as you start moving, real life comes in and there's obstacles. And first is an obstacle of one complaint, then another complaint where they're delayed for 30 days. And then there's a story with Miriam. They delayed another 7 days. And the next portion, they delayed 39 years. And eventually they're going to get to that destination. But the point is that the reality is much more complicated and messy than the ideal. If that's the case, why do you have to talk about the ideal? So why the first half of this book? In other words, why we're saying it's 7 books. So essentially we're saying that the 4th book is divided into 3. Because you have the ideal, you have the Torah, and you have the practical, which is imperfect. So why do you have to start with the ideal if the ideal is not practical? The answer is you must have the ideal. Even when you're in the practical, you still have to maintain the vision. So you can improve, so you can grow, and you could say, well, we're not there yet, but we're still aspirational, and we're still going to grow, and we're still going to get there eventually. Because if you just have one without the other, you're going to either be disconnected from real life or pulled down into real life without understanding and remembering that right now I got these pressures, and right now I don't feel that this is the perfect relationship, or I don't feel like I'm the perfect father, but I still have that vision of what I wanted, and therefore I'm going to work toward it. It may take me a month, it may take me 40 years, it may take me 7 days, whatever it's going to be, but I'm going to get there. In other words, you must have the ideal, you must have the practical, you must have the glue that keeps them together, which is the Torah, which is basically almost like the blueprint and the vision and the map, and then that connects the two. So that is really 12:59. I have another minute or two, so I want to go back to this story, but that's important to understand. The upside down nuns, up till this point in the 5th book, in the 4th book, everything is perfect. And then as soon as we start traveling, everything blows up. What happened? Very simple. Till now, we were talking about the vision, the ideal, a honeymoon. I'm thinking about my dream. Everything's going to be perfect in my imagination, aspiration. And then you have practical. And then life is about
Once you start trying to
implement.
perfect,
Yeah. And then right, it's always in your mind, it's always more perfect. In the ideal, it's always more perfect. If you think about, I'm going to be the best parent. I'm going to be the perfect parent. There's no perfect parent, but there still is the idea of the dream. Don't give up the dream, because the dream keeps you growing. Otherwise, you make peace with the imperfection and you don't improve. Right? So you have to have both those, and that's exactly what Torah is telling us, what Rebbe is telling us by saying there are 3 books. It's not just one story. We were good and we crashed. No, there are 3 books. There's perfection, there's the ideal, there's the Torah, there's the practical. And you need all 3 books. You can't have one without the other. Because the ideal, if you have the ideal, the person who wants the ideal relationship never gets a relationship.
What's the difference between ideal and
So the Torah is the divine ideal. Torah is what tells us what the ideal should be, right? So this is my picture of what I want, but it's the foundation, the glue is the Torah. The Torah is the holiness. So in a way, you could think about this as book 5. Book 5 is Moshe repeats the elements of the Torah. Moshe is repeating the values of the Torah. But in the book 5, Moshe is repeating the stories the way they actually happened. And therefore, there's a lot of sadness in book 5.
he's recounting everything.
Everything that happened, but so that when they enter Israel, they should remember the values of the Torah. Here, in the ideal world, Moshe only has to say 2 verses. He doesn't have to say the whole 5th book. In other words, in some ways, the Torah, the way it's described in these 2 verses, is the ideal. Everything is perfect. God is here. The enemies run away. The challenges flee, and everything is perfect. So even the Torah, there's 2 stages of the Torah. There's the Torah in the ideal world and the Torah in the real world, which is a struggle to maintain and to implement the values of the Torah. So we have in other words, you can think about the Torah itself in 2 ways: the way the Torah is in the middle of book 3, and middle of book 4, and then the way the Torah is in book 5, where it's about practical implementation of the values of the Torah, which could become very complex, which is challenging. It took us still taking us 3,000 years until we make the world perfect, which is the Messianic era. So it's not so simple. It takes time. But we don't give up the vision. We say that we had the vision of the Messianic era when there would be peace in the world and prosperity and the world will be full of the knowledge of God and there will be no hatred. You look out the window, you read the New York, you read the newspaper, you don't see it, but we still have the vision. We're not going to give up the vision because of the practical, and we're not going to be disconnected from the practical because of our vision. We're going to have both. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Thank you, Rabbi. Can we consider Torah because it's kind of visually separated?
Yeah.
Torah, you cannot ignore that. Can we consider like entire Torah like a the guide for practical implementation of the vision?
In a way, yes. But if you think about this, we actually did a JLI on this. Almost every story in the Torah happens twice. The first time in the ideal, and then the ideal crashes, and then you have to remake it. We talked about this. Remember, almost every story. For example, the story of creation. God creates the world, 7 days, everything is perfect. What happens right after that? Adam and Eve eat the thing. And then you have to recreate it. And then even not only Adam and Eve, you talk about the destruction of the world, ultimately, the corruption of the world, ultimately to the flood. And after the flood, we have Noah and his sons have to rebuild the world. And that's why so many elements of the book of the story of what God tells Adam, God reiterates to Noah. You know, a lot of the values and the covenant. He makes another covenant with him, the covenant of the rainbow. The point is, there's two stories of creation. There's the story of creation the way God creates it, and that's a perfect, and the imagery is perfect, but perfection doesn't work. Perfection implodes or explodes. I don't know exactly if it implodes or explodes or both. Then you say, maybe we need more human participation. So maybe Noah and his sons could start repopulating the world. It's much more complicated. Another simple, the best example would be another example would be the story of the Ten Commandments, the tablets. God gives Moshe the tablets. Those tablets are perfect. Why are they perfect? God, made by God. The stones, God carves out the stones and God carves out the letters. What happens to the first set of tablets? They break. Why? The people sin. Perfection doesn't work with sin, so you have to break the tablets. Then they repent. God gives them a second tablet. Second tablets are different. It's not perfect. Moshe carves out the stone, and God inscribes the letters. It's not as perfect. It's not as holy. It's not as perfect, but it lasts. Okay, and almost you could. There's so many cases where you see this in the story. Even next week is the spies. The first time Moshe sends spies, it doesn't work. The second time in the book of prophets, Joshua sends spies, it does work. There's always that model where you have the perfect image implodes, and then you have the second try, which takes longer. It's not as perfect, but it works. So the question is, who needs model one? Just go to model two. The answer is, without model one, there'd be no model two. Without the vision of perfection, we wouldn't be able to navigate and overcome and be inspired to overcome the struggles because we know that there's something so great out there. But if we had not had the vision, if we had not had the ideal, then we can't navigate the practical.
Even for the second Passover, right? This is the
Passover, same thing, yeah.
Because we need to have a second chance.
So maybe that's why the second Passover is written right here. Because before we start the debacle, we said, remember, the description is, even if a Jew is very far from Jerusalem, you can always come back and bring the second Passover. So no matter how far you drift away from the ideal, don't forget there is an ideal. And you could correct. And you could today when you go off that, with the GPS and you go off and you make a wrong turn, they say, what do they say? They say recalculating? Rerouting. You can always reroute because you have the vision of what you want. Now, some people stop dreaming. Okay, I thought I'm going to have a great marriage. I thought I'm going to be a great parent. I thought I'm going to be able to achieve something in the world. It's much more complicated. I failed more than once, so forget it. I'm going to stop aspiring. But that's a mistake because the Torah is giving you the perfect model and the practical model. And if you don't have the perfect model as a vision, you're never going to be able to achieve anything in the practical model. So that is a little bit about this parsha. A lot more to say, but I think we'll stop here because number one rule is end on time. So even though we violated that rule a few minutes late, but at least we're not going to violate it so aggressively. So thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Oh, Ben, I think you're on mute. I don't know. Oh, beautiful. Okay, wonderful day, everybody. Thank you for joining. And should meet each other again in good health. Thank you.